years ago, this week, it was actually 60 years ago Saturday, but it wasn't a Saturday when he gave the speech. President John Kennedy gave a speech at American University that was probably one of his most famous speeches. It was about peace. And I wanted to share parts of this speech with you because I think it is such an important speech. And so I'm going to start and stop it and offer some commentary, and it'll run through this section and the next section of the show. But here's how he begins.
I have therefore chosen this time and place to discuss a topic on which ignorance too often abounds and the truth too rarely perceived, and that is the most important topic on earth, peace.
Yeah, and then he continues.
What kind of a peace do I mean, and what kind of a peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war, not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time.
Remember when we had a country and a time and a national spirit that talked about these large issues in this context? He continues.
I speak of peace, therefore, as the necessary, rational end of rational men. I realize the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war, and frequently the words of the pursuers fall on deaf ears, but we have no more urgent task.
Amen. Kennedy continues.
No government or social system is so evil that its people must be considered as lacking in virtue.
That's an amazing point.
Our military forces are committed to peace and disciplined in self-restraint. Our diplomats are instructed to avoid unnecessary irritants and purely rhetorical hostility. For we can seek a relaxation of tensions without relaxing our guard. And for our part, we do not need to use threats to prove we are resolute.
Kennedy continues.
Meanwhile, we seek to strengthen the United Nations to help solve its financial problems, to make it a more effective instrument for peace, to develop it into a genuine world security system, a system capable of resolving disputes on the basis of law, of ensuring the security of the large and the small, and of creating conditions under which arms can finally be abolished.
Now, he didn't just preach about the United Nations in a complete vacuum there. The United Nations was the perpetual whipping boy, the perpetual object of scorn and hate of the Republican Party, had been since the 1940s. So Kennedy was actually, that was a very political statement right there. He continues.
The United States, as the world knows, will never start a war.
Oops, George Bush.
We do not want a war. We do not now expect a war. This generation of Americans has already had enough, more than enough, of war and hate and oppression.
And?
We shall be prepared if others wish it. We shall be alert to try to stop it. But we shall also do our part to build a world of peace where the weak are safe and the strong are just. We are not helpless before that task or hopeless of its success. Confident and unafraid, we must labor on, not towards a strategy of annihilation, but towards a strategy of peace.
You listen to that speech and think back to the Gulf of Tonkin that followed it by a couple of years, and the tragedy of Vietnam, the crime of Vietnam, let's be clear, or the George W. Bush, actually George Herbert Walker Bush, you know, lying us into the first Iraq War. That, you know, saying that, you know, there was this, the Kuwaitis were throwing, or excuse me, the Iraqis were throwing babies out of incubators and things like that. You know, he set that whole thing up by saying, April Gillespie saying to Saddam, yeah, sure, you can attack Kuwait for stealing your oil, no problem. And that didn't work out all that well. And then George W. Bush lying about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and then lying about Afghanistan, the government of Afghanistan being involved in 9/11. They weren't. And in fact, they offered to arrest bin Laden and turn him over to a third party. So it's I think, an important moment in time to recall that this country has had moments of great aspiration. Obviously, we haven't always risen to them. In fact, more often than not, we've failed to rise to them, sadly. But it's still part of us, and we need to embrace that and frankly, return to that kind of rhetoric. We'll be right back.